Okay. This poem is called Selling Manhattan. So we're sort of looking at here the history. There is a sort of story around selling Manhattan and this idea that like colonists bought it from indigenous folks, by manipulating them or abusing their sort of trust. So the story is not a good one in terms of like how Manhattan was purchased from the Native Americans. Right off the bat, I sort of noticed the italics, which typically for Duffy sort of indicate dialogue. And I would say, like, looking at the reading, that seems to sort of match up with what's happening. Engine is a slur, is slang. So this is probably from the perspective of the colonist. Right, $24 worth of glass beads and gaudy cloth. Gaudy speaks to sort of like the cheapness of the fabric or the fashionableness of the fabric. So it's definitely not a fair trade. I got myself a bargain. So it feels to me a little bit like kind of stealing from the Native Americans. I brandish firearms and fire water, which are stereotypically like what was used to sort of like help subjugate or to diminish the ability of Native Americans to sort of like operate on a fair ground. So that's not great. Here, praise the Lord definitely then sort of feels sarcastic, or at least, if nothing else, sort of disingenuous. Right? That this is not like a sincere or kind trade, especially here because, again, this is another slur. So, like, there's actually like a kind of big element here of cruelty of the colonizer to or against the Native Americans. So the shift here away from italics indicates that this is probably the indigenous person, right? So this is the Native American person speaking. I wonder if the ground has anything to say. You have made me drunk. So the you is probably, again, the colonists. You have made me drunk. This is a reference to the alcohol that we had up here, and drowned out the world's slow truth with rapid lies. So this speaks to sort of cultural differences, because the world's slow truth here is a positive, right? That like the world was peaceful and calm and maybe kind, and then the colonists come and sort of like make that negate that, right? But as always, a contradiction today. So there's a change. I hear again and plainly see. So this indigenous person is has a bigger sense of alert, is more alert, or is a little bit more with it. Wherever you have touched the earth is sore. So this idea of like the damage created by the colonists, and also sort of like the kind of celebration or uplifting of Mother Earth, is something I think we can also sort of see in this stanza. I wonder, so there's sort of like some repetition between stanza 1 and stanza 2, if the spirit of the water has anything to say. So here we've sort of looked at earth. Here we're looking at water. And we're getting sort of the personification of both of those things, of both the earth and the water, as sort of like parts of the natural world. That you will poison it, right? And that makes sense. I do think will is really interesting, though, because will speaks of future tense. So this is not necessarily like what the colonist has already done, but instead what they will do, and that sort of speaks to this idea of the future a little bit more. I think that's kind of interesting. That you can no more own the rivers and the grass, then own the air. And again, if we want to talk about kind of generically sort of like white culture, that kind of possession piece as being really important to white culture versus indigenous culture. And again, we have like repetition, that you. And so like you own the water, the grass, and the air. So like 3 elements, trying to own those elements, whereas I sing with true love for the land. So really genuine. They see themselves as really genuine. Dawn chant, the song of sunset, starlight song. And I think this, right, this sort of like chant, song, and psalm are all sort of like religious terms, which sort of speaks to their faith. And here it connects to like sort of the natural world, which is really important. Trust your dreams. No good will come of this. So this is normally trust your dreams would feel like sort of a positive, but it actually here ends up sort of being a negative, and that's not so great. My heart is on the ground as when my loved one fell back in my arms and died. This actually speaks of grief. This is an expression, and it speaks of grief or loss. Like your heart is out of your body and on the ground, speaks to loss. And this, when my loved one fell back in my arms and died, I think could be a reference to like sort of 2 things. It could be an allusion to 2 things. It could be the illness or disease that was often sort of deliberately or inadvertently sort of given to Native or Indigenous populations. Or it could be the Trail of Tears and those kind of forced marches where people died. Or it could be even an attack, right? So I guess 3 things. So but either way, it's sort of like the kind of death of Indigenous people, right? And that's really sad. I have learned the solemn laws, and solemn here means serious, of joy and sorrow. Sort of the juxtaposition of those 2 like pretty big emotions in the distinction between morning's frost and firefly's flash. So kind of all day we're learning sort of like the extent of those sort of 2 emotions. Man who fears death, this is going to be the white man, the colonist. Man who fears death. How many acres do you need to lengthen your shadow under an endless sky? So I do think this is really interesting because we're talking about lengthening versus an endless sky. So again, we sort of have this juxtaposition. And what he's really asking is like, how much land do you need to feel important enough? Right? So how much land do you need to feel important enough? Last time, this moment, now. So, throughout all time, all different time periods, a boy speaks of youth and sort of innocence, feels his freedom vanish like the salmon going mysteriously out to sea. So there's like no control. He has no control over kind of what's happening. It doesn't necessarily understand what's happening. And again, this sort of connection to earth and to like the natural world is very Native American, very indigenous. Loss holds the silence of great stones. So like the kind of weight and scale of those, and the sort of like the eternal nature of great stones speaks to the eternal nature of this like loss or this grief. And here it's the loss of the world and that freedom. And again, we have this like one-liner, I will live in the ghost of grasshopper and buffalo. So again, juxtaposition of big and small.